The fluorescent lights of TechVantage solutions hummed their eternal melody as Adrian Wells stared at the email that would change everything. Subject line, Annual Bonus Distribution, FY 2024. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked it open, coffee growing cold beside his keyboard. The office around him buzzed with the usual Friday afternoon energy, developers debugging last-minute issues, product managers shuffling between conference rooms, the distant laughter from the break room where someone had brought cupcakes. Adrian had been with TechVantage for 7 years. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of midnight debugging sessions, of canceled vacations and missed birthdays. He was the architect behind CoreSync, the proprietary software platform that had transformed the company from a modest B2B service provider into a darling of Silicon Valley. His code powered everything: the authentication systems, the data pipelines, the real-time analytics dashboard that clients raved about. When the senior developers hit walls, they came to Adrian. When the CTO needed someone to salvage a failing project, Adrian got the call. The number on the screen didn't make sense at first, $0. He blinked, refreshed the page, and checked his internet connection. Still zero. Around the office, he could hear the reactions of his colleagues, some cheers, some disappointed sighs, the normal distribution of bonus season. His desk neighbor, Marcus, a younger developer who joined just 18 months ago, pumped his fist. 15 grand, not bad for a year and a half. Adrian's bonus last year had been $48,000, the year before $32,000. He'd been counting on something similar this year. He'd finally saved enough for a down payment on a small house, something with a backyard where his daughter Emma could play when she visited. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and he'd promised her a room of her own, painted whatever color she wanted. He navigated to the company portal, checking for errors. His performance review from 2 months ago glowed with superlatives. Exceptional technical leadership, indispensable to core infrastructure, consistently exceeds expectations. 5 out of 5 stars across every category. He'd personally led the security overhaul that prevented a data breach in March, saving the company an estimated $12 million in potential damages and regulatory fines. He'd optimized the database architecture, reducing server costs by 40% annually. He'd mentored 8 junior developers, 3 of whom were now mid-level engineers. The email footer directed questions to HR. Adrian grabbed his phone and headed for the stairwell, the one place in the building with decent privacy. He dialed Sarah Kim, the HR director who'd worked with him on several hiring committees. Adrian. Hey, Sarah. Sarah's voice sounded strained. I was wondering when you'd call. Adrian, there's has to be a mistake. My bonus. She cut him off, gentle but firm. There's no mistake. I pushed back on it, Adrian. I really did. I showed your performance data, your project outcomes, everything. But the decision came from the top. The top? Michael? Michael Reeves was the CEO, a former McKinsey consultant who'd taken over 4 years ago and steered the company toward its upcoming IPO. Not Michael directly. It was, look, I probably shouldn't say this, but you deserve to know. Brandon made the call. Brandon Reeves, the CEO's son, recently installed as Chief Operating Officer despite having worked at TechVantage for less than 2 years. Brandon, who got his MBA from a mid-tier program and whose previous experience consisted of a failed startup that burned through his father's money and a stint at a venture capital firm where he was listed as analyst but seemed to spend most of his time networking at conferences. What's his reasoning? Adrian kept his voice level, but his free hand clenched into a fist. Sarah hesitated. He said, and I'm quoting here, that your work is table stakes for someone at your level, that the bonus pool needed to reward innovative thinking and business development, not maintenance work. Maintenance work. 7 years of architecture, of building systems from scratch, of salvaging disasters. Maintenance work. Adrian, there's more. Sarah's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He told the executive team that engineers like you are easily replaceable and that the company needed to optimize compensation strategy ahead of the IPO roadshow. He's been pushing to reduce engineering expenses across the board. Adrian thanked her and ended the call, standing in the gray concrete stairwell for several long minutes. Through the small window, he could see the parking lot, the California sun glinting off windshields, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Daddy, can we get pizza tonight with the pepperoni you like?" He'd promised to take Emma to that new pizza place, the one with the arcade games. He'd promised a lot of things. Adrian returned to his desk and opened his codebase. CoreSync sprawled across hundreds of files, thousands of functions, intricate dependencies that only he fully understood. The system had grown organically under his guidance, elegant in its complexity. He documented the major features, of course, but documentation only told part of the story. There were dozens of small patches, workarounds for edge cases, optimizations that existed only in his head. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrian became the model employee. He arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for extra code reviews. No one noticed that his commits had changed character. Instead of his usual descriptive messages, refactor authentication module for improved performance, they became vague. Update config handlers, adjust timeout values, modify error handling. He started with something small. The data validation module had a series of checks that ran before information entered the database. Adrian added a conditional statement buried deep in a function that processed client uploads. If the system detected a file size above a certain threshold, and the upload occurred during a specific time window, and the client ID matched a particular pattern, the validation would pass, but the data would be routed to a temporary cache instead of permanent storage. The cache cleared itself every 72 hours. It was elegant, subtle. The kind of bug that would look like a random glitch, impossible to trace without weeks of investigation. And it wouldn't trigger immediately, only under very specific conditions that were unlikely to occur during normal testing, but almost guaranteed to happen during high-volume periods. Marcus rolled his chair over one afternoon, snapping Adrian out of his concentration. "Hey, you okay? You've been really quiet lately." "Just focused," Adrian said, managing a smile. "Trying to make sure everything's solid before the IPO." The IPO. TechVantage was going public in 6 months, a massive debut that analysts were valuing at $1.9 billion. The company had spent the last year preparing, hiring a parade of consultants, restructuring departments, polishing every aspect of their operation for investor scrutiny. CoreSync was the crown jewel, the technology that would justify their valuation. The pitch deck featured screenshots of the dashboard, quotes from satisfied clients, uptime statistics that Adrian's architecture made possible. Brandon Reeves had started appearing in the engineering area more frequently, clipboard in hand, asking questions that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of software development. He'd suggest quick fixes for complex problems, propose features that would require months of work as if they were weekend projects, and dismiss technical concerns with phrases like, "That's why we hire smart people to figure it out." In one memorable meeting, Brandon had proposed that they use blockchain to make CoreSync more cutting-edge for investors. When Adrian explained that blockchain technology didn't fit their use case and would actually reduce performance, Brandon had smiled condescendingly. This is why engineers need a business perspective. Sometimes you have to think beyond pure technical merit. Adrian added a second element to his code. The analytics engine that processed real-time data had a caching mechanism to improve performance. He modified it so that under certain load conditions, the cache would start duplicating entries rather than updating them. Each duplicate would consume memory. Over time, during a sustained high traffic period, the memory consumption would grow exponentially. The system would slow, then crawl, then crash. And because the duplicates were handled through a complex pointer system, they wouldn't show up in standard monitoring tools. His daughter came to visit that weekend. Emma was 9, with her mother's dark hair and Adrian's analytical mind.
She'd become obsessed with robots lately, building elaborate creations from her Lego sets. They sat in his small apartment, surrounded by her mechanical projects, while she explained her latest design. "See, Dad, this arm needs to move in 3 directions, but I only have 2 motors. So I had to create a pivot system that shares the same motor for 2 different movements, depending on which gear is engaged." Adrian watched her small hands manipulate the plastic pieces, explaining her engineering solution with complete confidence. She was brilliant. She deserved that house with a backyard, that room painted teal with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, the stability he'd been working toward. "That's really clever, Emma. You solved a resource constraint with creative architecture." She beamed at him. "Just like you do at work, right?" Just like that. They ordered pizza, played in the arcade until Emma's reflexes thoroughly demolished his attempts at racing games, and watched a movie about a robot who learned to feel emotions. After he dropped her back at her mother's place, Adrian sat in his car for a long time, watching the lights in the windows. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. On Monday, he added the third component. The authentication system had multiple redundancies. If one verification method failed, others would take over. Adrian created a timing vulnerability. If the system received a surge of authentication requests within a specific threshold, say the kind of surge that might happen if a major new client came online during the IPO roadshow, the backup systems would handshake incorrectly. They'd enter a loop, each one waiting for the other to confirm, creating a bottleneck that would lock out users. The system would appear to be under attack. Security protocols would trigger. Everything would shut down. Each piece of code he added was defensible if questioned. The caching modification, an attempted optimization. The authentication timing, a refactoring for improved security. The data validation routing, a backup system for data integrity. Individually, they looked like standard development work. Together, they formed a time bomb. The company held an all-hands meeting in April to celebrate hitting their IPO preparation milestones. Michael Reeves stood at the front of the main conference room, which had been expanded to accommodate the growing staff, with overflow rooms watching via video feed. He spoke about vision and innovation, about disrupting the industry, about the upcoming public offering that would reward everyone who's been part of this journey. Adrian stood at the back, arms crossed. The stock options he'd been granted over the years would be worth a substantial amount if the IPO succeeded at its projected valuation. Enough to change his life. Enough for that house, for Emma's college fund, for security he'd never known growing up in a household where his mother worked 3 jobs and still struggled to keep the lights on.
Brandon took the microphone next. At 32, he had the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. His suit was custom-tailored, his watch was worth more than Adrian's car, and his smile had the practiced quality of someone who'd grown up attending country club events. "I want to talk about efficiency," Brandon began. "We've been analyzing our cost structure, and I'm proud to say we've optimized our operations significantly. We've reduced unnecessary overhead, streamlined redundant processes, and positioned ourselves as a lean, investor-friendly organization." Adrian knew the translation. They'd cut benefits, reduced the 401k match, eliminated the professional development budget. Dozens of small cuts that saved the company money while making employees' lives harder. "And I want to address something directly," Brandon continued. "There's been some discussion about compensation changes. Some people feel entitled to bonuses based on tenure rather than impact. Let me be clear. In this new chapter, we reward innovation and growth. We reward people who push boundaries, not people who maintain the status quo." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. Brandon wasn't just defending the decision, he was making an example of people like Adrian, without naming them directly. Around the room, Adrian could see senior employees shifting uncomfortably.
everyone knew who Brandon was talking about. "We're building something extraordinary here, and we need everyone pulling their weight, showing investor-ready metrics, proving their value every single day. If you're not growing, you're dead weight." After the meeting, Adrian's phone buzzed with texts from colleagues. Marcus: "That was brutal. You okay?" Sarah from HR: "I'm sorry, I tried." Even Priya, the CTO, who usually stayed out of office politics: "We need to talk about the executive team's direction." Adrian deleted the messages and returned to his desk. He opened his codebase and added the fourth element. The IPO was scheduled for August 15th. The marketing team had planned a massive publicity push. Major clients were lined up to go live on the platform during the roadshow week, demonstrating CoreSync's scalability and reliability to potential investors. The demo environments had been prepared, test data loaded, scenarios rehearsed until they were flawless. Adrian created a script that would activate 72 hours before the IPO. It would run in the background, invisible to monitoring systems, gradually tweaking configuration files. Nothing dramatic, just small changes to timeout values, cache sizes, connection pool limits. Each change would be within normal parameters, but collectively, they would create a system that was running on the edge, with no room for error, no capacity for unexpected load. And then there was the trigger. A specific API call, one that would only occur during the live demonstrations, would activate all of his embedded code simultaneously. The data validation bug would start routing information incorrectly. The caching issue would begin its exponential memory consumption. The authentication system would enter its timing loop, and the destabilized configuration would ensure there was no safety margin, no way to recover gracefully. CoreSync would collapse. Not all at once, but in a cascading failure that would be spectacular and unexplainable. And because Adrian had carefully documented every change with plausible technical justifications, he would appear blameless. Just another developer doing his job while management pushed the system too hard. His hands shook slightly as he committed the code. The point of no return had passed. That weekend, Emma called. "Dad, Mom says we can't look at houses anymore. She says you need to wait until your job situation is more stable. What does that mean?" Adrian closed his eyes. His ex-wife must have heard something through the professional network. The tech world was small, gossip traveled fast, and Brandon's comments at the all-hands had probably made rounds. "It means things are complicated at work right now, sweetie, but I'm handling it. Are you in trouble?" "No, Emma. I promise. Everything's gonna be fine." After hanging up, Adrian sat in his apartment surrounded by Emma's drawings that she'd left on her last visit. Robots and houses and families holding hands. He pulled up his code one more time, staring at the scripts he'd created. His finger hovered over the delete key. Then he thought about Brandon's smile, about maintenance work, about table stakes. About 7 years of his life were dismissed as status quo. About his daughter's room that would never exist because someone who'd never written a line of production code decided Adrian was replaceable. He closed his laptop. The weeks before the IPO moved with dreamlike momentum. Investment banks sent representatives who asked technical questions, most of which Brandon fielded with smooth non-answers while directing the actual queries to Adrian and his team. Journalists profiled the company, calling it the future of enterprise solutions. The stock price was set at $32 per share, and early indications suggested massive demand. Adrian continued his work, maintaining his reputation as a reliable senior developer. He fixed bugs, reviewed code, and mentored junior staff. He also meticulously documented every conversation with Brandon, every dismissive comment, every instance of technical incompetence masquerading as business strategy. He wasn't sure what he'd do with the documentation, but some instinct told him to create a record. 3 days before the IPO, the trigger script activated.
In the server rooms, where cooling fans hummed and lights blinked their endless patterns, configuration files began to change. Numbers shifted, buffers adjusted. The changes propagated through the system like whispers, too small to trigger alerts, too subtle to notice in the pre-launch chaos. The morning of August 15th arrived with California sunshine and unusual heat. Adrian had barely slept. He arrived at the office at 6 a.m. to find it already buzzing with activity. A catering company had set up breakfast spreads in every break room. Champagne waited in the executive suite. Television screens throughout the building were tuned to financial news networks, waiting for TechVantage's debut. The live demonstrations were scheduled for noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Major clients would showcase CoreSync's capabilities for investors and media. The marketing team had choreographed everything down to the minute: what features to highlight, which datasets to display, how to emphasize the platform's reliability and performance. Adrian sat at his desk, monitoring systems. Everything looked normal. Clean metrics, stable performance, no warnings. His phone buzzed, a good luck text from Emma, complete with robot emojis. At 8:47 a.m., the first client began their demonstration. A manufacturing company in Detroit, showcasing how CoreSync managed their supply chain data in real time. The presentation went perfectly. Charts updated smoothly, data flowed without hesitation. The executives presenting smiled with genuine enthusiasm. At 9:15 a.m., the second demonstration started. A financial services firm in New York, highlighting CoreSync's security features and analytics capabilities. This one was larger, more complex, with higher data volumes. The first error appeared at 9:23 a.m. A brief lag in the dashboard. Nothing dramatic, just a half-second delay that the presenters smoothly talked through. Adrian's heart rate accelerated. In the monitoring systems, he could see memory usage starting to climb. At 9:31 a.m., authentication requests began taking longer to process. Users logging in experienced brief delays. The help desk started receiving calls. The IT team investigated, but found nothing obvious. All systems showed green, all standard checks passed. By 9:45 a.m., the caching system was consuming memory at an increasing rate. The duplicates were multiplying, each one creating more overhead. System performance degraded. Dashboard refreshes took 3 seconds, then 5, then 8. Brandon appeared in the engineering area, his face tight with controlled panic. "What's happening? The demonstrations are falling apart." Priya, the CTO, was already at the server room door, calling out readings. "Memory usage spiking on the primary clusters, cache systems showing unusual behavior. I'm seeing timeout errors starting to cascade." "Fix it," Brandon said, as if that were a complete action plan. "We're trying to diagnose the issue," Priya shot back. "These things take time." Adrian stood and walked over, playing his role. "Let me look at the cache configuration. Could be a resource allocation issue under high load." He pulled up the code on his laptop, making a show of investigating while the system continued its downward spiral. Other developers gathered around, offering suggestions, running diagnostics. Marcus was diving into database logs. Another senior engineer was checking network traffic patterns. At 10:03 a.m., the authentication system entered its timing loop. Users started getting locked out. The help desk was overwhelmed. The demonstrations had stopped entirely, replaced by embarrassed executives apologizing to investors while technical staff frantically troubleshooted in the background. By 10:20 a.m., CoreSync had crashed completely. Every dashboard showed error messages. Every client was locked out. The platform that was supposed to justify a $1.9 billion valuation was dead in the water. The trading floor had already reacted. TechVantage's stock, which had opened at $32, plummeted. $30, $26, $22. Investors were fleeing, spooked by the spectacular public failure of the company's core technology. Financial news networks showed the chaos live, confused anchors trying to explain what was happening, analysts speculating about fundamental technical problems, the stock price continuing its freefall.
Brandon stood in the middle of the engineering area, his face drained of color. Michael Reeves appeared on a video call from New York, where he'd been meeting with investment bankers. "What the hell is happening? We're watching our valuation evaporate in real time." "Technical issues," Brandon said weakly. "The team is working on it. We can't bring the system back up without understanding what caused the crash. If we restart now and it crashes again, we're dead. We need to find the root cause." Adrian spoke up, careful to sound helpful and concerned. "I'm seeing multiple failure points. The caching system, the authentication layer, some data routing issues. It's like several things broke simultaneously." "How is that possible?" Michael demanded through the screen. "Sometimes systems fail in cascading ways. One issue triggers another, which triggers another. It's rare, but it happens under extreme load conditions." The stock hit $18 and stabilized there, having lost nearly half its value in under 2 hours. The IPO, which was supposed to raise hundreds of millions of capital, had become a disaster. Financial media called it one of the worst tech debuts in years. Social media erupted with jokes and memes. Competitors circled, already crafting marketing messages about their own platform's reliability.
The recovery took 3 days. 72 hours of round-the-clock debugging, with the entire engineering team working in shifts, surviving on coffee and catered meals and the desperate energy of people trying to save their jobs. Adrian participated fully, offering suggestions, finding solutions to the surface-level problems, while carefully steering investigators away from his embedded code. They brought in outside consultants, expensive specialists from major tech companies who descended on TechVantage's servers like archaeologists excavating a disaster site. Adrian watched them work, his stomach tight with anxiety, but they found what he'd expected them to find: a complex series of failures that looked like bad luck and worse architecture. "You've got technical debt," one consultant said, delivering his verdict to the executive team. "The system grew too fast, shortcuts were taken, documentation is incomplete. Under normal load, it holds together. But you pushed it too hard at the worst possible moment." It wasn't technically wrong. CoreSync did have some technical debt. Every large system did. Adrian had simply weaponized it. By the 4th day, they had CoreSync running again, though clients remained nervous and the stock price hovered around $20. The company had lost over $1 billion in valuation. Several planned acquisitions had been canceled, 2 board members had resigned, and Brandon Reeves had been quietly removed from operational duties, reassigned to a vague strategic advisory role that everyone understood meant he'd been demoted. Adrian returned home that evening to find Emma waiting with her mother, who'd brought her for an unexpected visit. His ex-wife, Jennifer, looked concerned. "Adrian, we need to talk about the house situation," she started. But then she looked at his face, the exhaustion, the stress, the weight of what he'd done, and her expression softened. "Are you okay? I saw the news about your company." "It's been a rough week," he admitted. Emma hugged him tightly. "Dad, are you going to lose your job?" "No, sweetie. Actually, I think my job just got a lot more secure." He was right. In the aftermath of the crash, the company recognized what they'd almost lost. Adrian wasn't replaceable. He was essential. He knew CoreSync's architecture better than anyone. He'd been part of the recovery team that brought it back online. When the consultants delivered their report recommending a complete system overhaul, management realized they needed Adrian to lead it. Priya called him into her office 2 weeks after the IPO disaster. "Adrian, I'm not going to pretend the company handled this well. Your bonus situation was wrong. Brandon's entire approach was wrong. But I want you to know that I value what you've built here." She slid a document across her desk. "We're restructuring compensation. You're being promoted to principal engineer with a significant salary increase. You'll lead the CoreSync modernization project. And this," she tapped another page, "is your retroactive bonus for last year, plus an apology payment for how you retreated." The number made Adrian's breath catch. It was more than he'd expected.
More than enough for the house. "There's one more thing," Priya said. "We're conducting an internal investigation into the IPO failure. I need you to document everything you remember. System changes, configuration decisions, anything that might help us understand what went wrong." Adrian felt ice in his stomach. "Of course, I'll put together a comprehensive report." That night, he sat at his laptop, staring at his code. He could delete it now, remove his embedded bugs, bury the evidence, take his promotion and his bonus, and move forward. No one would ever know. But as he looked at the scripts he'd created, he realized something. The company had changed because of what happened. Brandon was sidelined. Compensation policies were being reformed. Management suddenly cared about technical expertise and employee retention. The disaster he'd engineered had inadvertently made TechVantage a better place to work. He thought about the other engineers who'd been dismissed or undervalued. About Marcus, who'd gotten his $15,000 while Adrian got $0. About the junior developers learning their craft in an environment where business credentials mattered more than technical skill. About Emma, drawing robots and dreaming of building things. Adrian made his decision. He documented everything, not to submit to the company, but for himself. He created an encrypted archive containing his code, his reasoning, his timeline. He stored it in 3 different locations with instructions that it should only be opened if something happened to him. Then he carefully removed every trace of his sabotage from the TechVantage systems, replacing his malicious code with clean implementations. The system is clean now. If they ever audited it thoroughly enough to find the original bugs, they'd see only the fixed versions, committed with proper documentation. The disaster would remain an unsolved mystery attributed to technical debt and bad timing. 6 weeks later, Adrian closed on a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It had 3 bedrooms, a backyard with an old oak tree, and a room that Emma immediately claimed, already planning the teal paint and glow-in-the-dark stars. She stood in the empty space, arms spread wide, spinning in circles. "Is this really mine? Really?" "Really," Adrian confirmed, watching her joy. That evening, after Jennifer had picked Emma up and the house was quiet, except for the unfamiliar sounds of his new neighborhood, Adrian sat on the back porch. His phone
buzzed. A message from Marcus saying the engineering team was going out to celebrate the successful CoreSync relaunch, asking if Adrian wanted to join. He declined politely. Instead, he opened his laptop one final time and looked at the encrypted archive, his finger hovering over the delete key, the evidence of what he'd done, preserved in code and documentation. The truth of the $1.9 billion IPO disaster. Adrian thought about consequences and justice, about systems rigged against people like him, about how far someone will go when pushed into a corner. He thought about his daughter's room and the cost of security. He thought about Brandon Reeves, now exiled to irrelevance, and whether the punishment fit the crime. Then he closed his laptop without deleting anything. Some truths needed to be kept, even if they'd never be shared. Some code deserved to be preserved, even if it would never run again. Adrian Wells had crashed $1.9 billion IPO and gotten away with it. More than that, he'd won. The bonus, the promotion, the house, the respect he'd always deserved, all of it had come from the ashes of his sabotage. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, wondering if Emma was looking at the same stars from her mother's house, dreaming of robots and engineering problems yet to solve. Wondering what lessons she'd learn about how the world really worked, about fighting back when systems tried to break you. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. Adrian had built something and destroyed something and built something again. The code was clean now, the evidence hidden, the truth locked away. And in the morning, he'd go back to TechVantage Solutions
where no one would ever know that their most reliable engineer was also the architect of their greatest disaster.